Welcome to Bandit's Keep. I'm Daniel. This week I want to, let's do a little bit of a thought experiment here. There was a conversation on my Discord, and I made the statement, I can't remember how we got there, that I thought the Tomb of Horrors would be an interesting module to introduce new players to RPGs. To which there was definitely a conversation. I'm not sure I convinced everyone, but let's see. We'll talk a little bit about it today. Let me get your opinions in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. Before we dig into this, let's talk about the Tomb of Horrors, just in case you have no idea what I'm talking about. Tomb of Horrors is a module that was written, I guess, in the 70s. It was written as a tournament module by Gary Gygax, one of the creators of Dungeons & Dragons, and it is notoriously either the best module ever written or the most terrible module ever written. And I think it's interesting because the concept of this module, and it says right in there, is that it's really designed to challenge players and to challenge players who may have maybe had it easy in their home games, if you will, and they've got these high-level characters with all these abilities and magic items and stuff. But the thing about the Tomb of Horrors is that it really needs to be overcome with what a lot of people will term player skill. That is to say that there's lots of things in the Tomb of Horrors that your +5 Holy Avenger is not going to help you with. So let's start by saying, again, this was a tournament module. It wasn't made to be won, really. The module is really designed, originally it was only 2-hour sessions, and it's really designed just to see how far can people get and earn points and this and that. And that's cool, right? And of course, like many tournament modules, they ended up making it a module that you could run for your group. And of course, they probably changed it up a little bit and fleshed it out. I don't know the whole history of it, but basically it's very difficult. And it's designed for high-level characters. So for me to say it's great for low levels, I'm being a little bit facetious here, but at the same time, I'm not. Let me talk about a few things here. I'm not going to spoil anything directly, although loosely I might. So you decide if you want to listen any further. I will say right now, though, if you're about to comment, please do start your comments with spoiler if you're going to mention any particular part of the module, because there's a lot of people out here who have not played this and might want to. Okay, so one thing the Tomb of Horrors does is it sets up a situation where, like I said, most things can be and should be and might only be overcome through players having clever ideas. It has lots of traps. It has puzzles, but we'll talk about that in a second. And it's got obstacles, we'll call them, that need to be overcome. In every case, the solutions to these things are in the tomb. That is to say that no matter what kind of player characters you bring with you, if you need something to solve something to get further in the tomb, it's in the tomb. You don't have to expect the players are coming with a +1 sword. They don't have to have it to beat the tomb. Now, in the beginning of the module, there is, and I won't explain exactly how you come across it, but there is effectively a poem, a riddle, what you might want to call it. And this, it's one of those ones there that, unlike White Plume Mountain, which I think is very helpful, this one I think is harder to decipher, especially the first few things. But once you kind of are in the spots, I think a lot of it becomes kind of obvious. The reason why I like the idea of having some kind of legend or riddle, and I say riddle, but it's not kind of like you have to sit there and solve it. It's kind of like it describes, when you go past the blah, 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 make sure you do the, it has that kind of stuff, right? But what's nice about this is because this is a thinking person's module, and because it's not full of wandering monsters and combats and stuff, this is the kind of module that players that like to solve problems can sit down and dig into. This is not one of those kind of modules where you're going to be the DM that flips over the timer and goes, time's ticking by. This is not how you run this module. It's really designed to let the players take their time and try to figure things out. If they try to rush through it, like the tournament, many of them will likely die. But if they take their time and work their way through the stuff and be cautious, that won't be the case. So why do I think this is good for new players? Well, I think that a lot of times, people will complain about the classic, you start in a tavern being bad. But I also find that many starting adventures are basically goblins or giant rats or possibly orcs in a place where the party's going to go in, kick a door down, fight stuff, take their treasure, leave. And when we start our players with that type of adventure, that sets in their head that this is what D&D is. And D&D is that for some people, but for me, it's much more a project where we take on the role of a character, get inside their headspace, not necessarily doing voices, but inside the headspace of somebody in that position, in that world, and we try to overcome what's around us. Now, it's just common sense that in most cases, you are not going to try to pick a fight even if you are tough. But I think that in D&D, we're often tempted to do that because it seems like the most obvious thing. The Tomb of Horrors and adventures like it will teach players that that's not the way to go about it. And you might say, well, it's really boring to have them just go, we're going down checking for traps. Well, again, lots of stuff in here can't be overcome by conventional means. And this is what I like. There are places, traps, secret doors, clues that you must interact with in the world to overcome. You cannot solve them by a simple check because they're not designed that way. In other words, it doesn't just say you can't do it, but they're just not in a place where you could do it. Like if you were to do the common thing that you might do, you wouldn't find it. You have to do something special. And that thing that you need to do special is, fairly obvious if you, again, take the time to figure out you can't just do it. If you just walk into a place and go, I look for a secret door, you're not going to find it because that secret door might be, in a place that isn't exactly where you would normally look. So a roll is not going to allow you to find it in most cases. When I played through this in 5th edition, actually, the GM actually told us, I'm not going to let you use skill checks for everything because they wanted to keep that old school feel. But really, having played through it in AD&D and also having read through it many times now, I wouldn't have allowed that either because it's just set up in a way that's just not going to happen. Like it's not the way you think. Boy, it's hard not to give spoilers. But anyways, the idea that the players must try to do things, they have to interact with the world to figure things out. You come to a door and there's a bunch of these there, so I'm not going to give away much here. You come to a door that's full of mist and there's different designs around it, and you've got to figure out what to do. There's no role to figure out what to do because how would you even know? This is something designed specifically by this lich for their tomb. So no history roll is going to tell you what you should do here. You've got to just mess with it. You got to have your 10-foot pole and poke at it and do different things. And that's how we solve these kinds of adventures. I find that's a great thing for new players that don't necessarily know the rules. Why, you might say? Because you can just simply say to them, what do you do? And when they say, well, what can I do? They try to reach for their character sheet, say, no, what would your character do? This is what you see in front of you. You see this archway, it's filled with mist. There's this art around it. What do you want to do? They will naturally do the things that you would do from the fiction they've read. This has been my experience with brand new players. I haven't run brand new players through Tomb of Horrors because it was high level and it kind of didn't occur to me to do it, but I have run similar type adventures, and I find them much better for new players than, again, the conventional kick down the door adventures. All right, so beyond the idea that you can't just solve it by making a roll, and beyond the idea that there's some kind of a riddle or poem or history that gives you some hints as you're walking through so players can analyze it, there's a few more areas that I think really stand out that make, to me, just a generally good adventure anyways, but also a great adventure to kind of teach new players. I mentioned puzzles, and again, some people say, I don't like puzzles, I don't like riddles. But I think the reason why you don't like that is because if a riddle is written on the wall, it rises at whatever, and you just don't know the answer, then it becomes, do we roll against our intelligence? And if that's the case, why are we even doing this? But puzzles, on the other hand, especially ones where you can give props. A classic thing that I did once, which was really fun, is in Die Hard 2, I think it is, or 3. Somebody can tell me in the comments below. There's a challenge that the bad guy puts forward to the police where they have to use water, basically a balance of water to get a certain amount of gallons or whatever. And I used this exact same thing, except I switched from gallons to cups. And I actually physically gave the players, I should say, water and little like cups and stuff, and had them actually solve it. And it was fantastic because, again, new players, they just use their logic. They don't roll for it. And I know some people don't love that, but I think that this teaches us the classic way of play. In the classic way of play, you're not rolling an intelligence check for everything. You're trying to solve things on your own. And I should say we don't want to make things super complicated, but we do want to make them fun and interesting. And I suppose if you had somebody who was really struggling, then you could let a roll happen. Better, I think, though, to make it so that if they don't solve it, they don't just die. This is one of the problems with the Tomb of Horrors that I would adjust. There are traps in it that are save or die. This we want to remove. If we're running for first level characters, we don't want to have save or die traps. What we want to do is traps that will do different things. Maybe make them stink, or spray paint on them, or they lose a point of con, or something like that temporarily. This is a little bit more exciting because they still get the burn of, oh man, the trap got me, but their character's not dead, right? They're not going through a pile of characters. We're not doing a funnel. This can be really fun and interesting. And again, it becomes that challenge where the players themselves are like, oh man, I don't like that my character got sprayed with blue paint. Now I'm going to make sure I'm careful. And that's going to be fun. Another thing that works really well in this module, and I think I've mentioned this before, is that everything you need to solve everything is there. If you need a piece of cloth to solve one of the puzzles, there's a room that has a piece of cloth. This is not it. I'm, again, not trying to give spoilers here. If you need a vial of acid, there's a vial of acid. If you need a gemstone, there's a gemstone. If you need a porcupine, there's a porcupine. Make sure that everything to solve all the traps and riddles and stuff are in the dungeon. And make some of them really obvious. Make some of them not so obvious where the players can figure it out after. They have to get across a large area, that's got lava in it. But you don't, put a rope hanger from there necessarily, but you might put a hook in the ceiling where they can figure out to put a rope, or maybe 5 rooms back, there's a structure that they can pull wood off of or something, so you basically create the solution or one of the solutions in the dungeon. I think that's super important for these kind of things, especially for new players, because then you can say to them as a GM, okay, remember what you've seen so far. Did you see anything that might be useful? And you can just say this again, I'm talking about teaching people how to play. With more advanced players, you might not want to do that because, they might feel like you're giving it to them, right? They won't want the challenge. But for a new player, that's totally fair to do that. I believe I mentioned, there's not a lot of combat in the Tomb of Horrors, and this I like. I think having a handful of combats that are tough, but that can be solved through being clever or avoided is a great way to do a low-level module. That is to say, instead of just having skeletons you have to fight, or rats you have to slay, having something that would be hard for them to beat, like a wight, but having them in a place that they could be avoided or some way they could be stopped through player skill and ingenuity, even though technically the players don't have the magic sword to defeat them. And speaking of that, and without making this too long, because I'm sure I'm getting a lot of comments on this, a couple things actually. I was going to say final thing, but there's 2 things. 1, lots of treasure. Make sure there's a bunch of treasure in your module, and make sure that there's a place where the player characters get multiple places where there's treasure, and clearly they can keep going deeper. And the idea is to tempt their greediness, right? Make it so that they could just leave with the treasure. But what could be further in? If there's copper here, maybe there's silver there, maybe there's gold there, and then platinum, and then gems. You want to tempt them with the idea that there's more treasure and see how far they're willing to risk their characters. Again, this is the classic idea of the idea of classic play, where the deeper you go, the better the treasure, but the more dangerous it becomes. And I'll finish up by saying, now finally, that if you look at how the Tomb of Horrors operates, it gets more dangerous and more dangerous as you keep going. There's multiple places where the player characters can stop and get treasure and leave. But if they actually want to get to the treasure of the final bad guy, which they know about, which is a lich, that's not a spoiler, they need to keep going. And as they do, things become more and more risky. I love this. Also, and I don't think this is really a spoiler either, maybe it is, close your ears for a second if you don't want to be spoiled. The final guy that you have to fight, it's pretty darn tough. But there are secrets and ways to defeat this foe that make it a lot easier. And again, it just requires clever play and player characters trying stuff. If you've ever had a player who came from other systems, it came to a classic game, and then when it came time for their turn, often this player is a magic user, and they just go, I can't do anything. That is something that is learned. The things like the Tomb of Horrors teach you that you can always do something. It doesn't matter if you only have a dagger. There's things to be done. There's levers to be pulled. There's stuff to be interacted with in the room. There's items that can work against the monsters or against the traps. It just requires you using the environment, immersing yourself in the world, and becoming that character in that sense. Not so much that, necessarily even that you're in their headspace, in that you actually, you think you're an elf or something, but in that you're thinking like you were really there. You're in this tomb. You're trying to get this treasure. What would you do? So I would definitely love to know what people think about this. I am going to, at some point, try this. I know, as I mentioned, I will have to modify the module because there's definitely stuff in there that will 100% kill a low-level character that doesn't kill a high-level character. But I think that switching those things around a bit, at least most of them, and keeping the idea of the puzzles, the riddles or history, everything you need to solve the dungeon is there. Minimal combat, but the tasks get tougher and tougher the deeper you go. Treasure, deeper you go, the better it gets. How far will your players take it? This, to me, makes the perfect training module for somebody to learn the classic style. Again, I'm thinking brand new players to RPGs altogether when I first said it, but new to classic style maybe as well, as long as you make sure that you do a lot of, are you sure you want to do that? to the players that are used to playing characters that can easily kick down doors and kill the monsters. Well, I hope you found this video useful. Go ahead and like it if you did. Subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, do all that goodness. Also, comment below. Again, make sure you say spoiler in front of your comment if you're going to mention anything from the Tomb of Horrors, like a story or something specific, so that people aren't spoiled by it. Check the description below, and you'll find a link to my Discord server. Jump on over there. Maybe we'll continue the conversation over there as well. And my Patreon's down there as well if you want to support the channel. Finally, if you want one of these cool t-shirts, check that out as well in the description. Talk to you soon.